Hi, this is the Test 4 Review hard questions. So we've got 5 questions that are categorized as hard that do not need me to show the screen. So after this video, I'm going to do basically 8 questions where I show the screen. And those are ones that typically you can, they don't often pull up when you go to the link, so you'll need to go into the media gallery to try to find that. Okay, so question number 1, they want you to find the distance between these 2 points. So the distance formula is d equals the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So I recommend that you label your points. This is x and y, and this is x and y. I'm going to call this point 1, and I'm going to call this point 2. So now I know what each one is, and I can put them into my distance formula appropriately. So d equals x2 is -8 minus x1 is 16, then that's going to be squared. y2 is -44 minus y1 is 1, and that's going to be squared, and that whole thing is going to be under the square root. So -8 minus 16 is -24. That's going to get squared. -44 minus 1 is -45. That's going to get squared. And then the whole thing will be square rooted. So -24 squared, just remember that a -24 times -24 will give you a positive answer. So if you get a negative answer on your calculator, it's probably because you did not put -24 in parentheses. So the answer here is 576, and the answer here is 2025, and that's all under the square root. 2025 plus 576 will give me 2601, and that's under the square root. And if I take the square root of that, I get 51. So my answer is 51. That's the distance between those points. Okay, so then we're going to jump to question number 3. And question number 3 is a story problem. And they use like north, south, east, west. So they basically say that so-and-so's, there's a courthouse that's 9 miles east and 17 miles north or whatever. So take your graph and label it like a compass: north, south, east, west. And then if this first point is 9 miles east, that would be going to the right, and 17 miles up, that would be coming up here. And the second one is 6 miles west, but keep in mind, if I'm going west on my Cartesian plane, that's a negative, so I'm going to write that as a -6. And then south is also negative, so that's a -19. So if you forget to put these as negatives, it'll kind of screw up the whole formula. So my formula, so I'm gonna make this my x, y, x, y. I'm gonna make this 1 and this 2. Oops, 2, 2, 2. So remember, the formula is let me get something else to write on. D equals the square root of x2 minus x1 squared plus y2 minus y1 squared. So my x2 in this problem is -6 minus x1 is 9 squared. My y2 is -19 minus 17 squared. Okay, -6 minus 9 is -15. -19 minus 17 is -36. So -15 squared is a positive 225. -36 squared is a positive 1296. If I add those two, I get 1521. If I take the square root of that, I get 39. So my answer for the distance between the courthouse and her home or whatever is 39. All right. So let's move along to question number 28. And remember, these are difficult because there's a lot to the process. There's a lot to remember. They're time consuming and it's easy to make simple mistakes. So try to slow down on these ones. I always recommend that you do all the easy ones first on your test, then go back and do kind of medium ones and then save the hard ones till the end. Okay, so they want us to basically factor this and find the solution. So for a problem like this, most people learn to kind of do this factoring like this. So I have two sets of parentheses. I'm going to have an x and an x. This plus sign tells me the signs are the same, and this tells me what they are. They're both going to be minuses. Okay. I'm going to take factors of 18, so I'm going to write out the factors. 1 times 18 is 18, 2 times 9, 3 times 6, and then 4 doesn't go, 5 doesn't go, 6 goes, but I already have a 6. So these are the groups. And I want them to add up to give me 19. So which two add up to give me 19? These two. And I already know their signs are negative. So -1 plus -18 gives me a -19. So this is how it's factored. And then I would use my zero product property to take each of these and set them equal to 0 and solve to get my answer. So if I add 1, so x is 1, add 18, or x is 18. So you write your answer as 1, 18. Those are the two answers. Now, could you use a quadratic formula for that? Absolutely. The reason we don't is because if it's short and quick enough to factor, most people will develop their factoring skills, and that's what they'll choose to do. Especially if you're going on to higher level math, you don't want to stop and have to use a quadratic formula for every single question because it just takes too long. But the next two questions, we will use a quadratic formula, and just so you know, we could have used it for this one. It's just more time consuming. So what is the quadratic formula? X equals -b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac. That whole thing is over 2a. So let's identify what we have here. A is 3. It's always the number, the coefficient of the x squared. B is -1. It's the coefficient of the x. C is -4. We call that the constant coefficient because there is no x there. So we're going to plug these in. So I'm going to have -1 is b, so x equals plus or minus the square root of -1 is b. I'm going to square that. Notice I put it in parentheses so that the sign stays correct. In fact, what I do is I just make parentheses for every letter and then I put the numbers in, and that keeps everything correct regarding the negative signs. So this is what we have. And you could actually type this in to your calculator like this. You could go parentheses, -1, close parentheses, squared, minus 4, parentheses, 3, parentheses, -4, parentheses, and hit equals, and it'll do this whole thing for you and keep all the signs straight if you put the parentheses in. So I end up with 49. Now, negative times negative is positive, so I get 1 plus or minus the square root of 49 all over 6. Well, what is the square root of 49? It's 7. So I end up with 1 plus or minus 7 all over 6. So the plus or minus means I have two different answers. I have 1 plus 7, so I'm going to erase these so I have a little more room. I have 1 plus 7 over 6, and I have 1 minus 7 over 6. Well, 1 plus 7 is over 6. You're going to want to simplify that. You could put it in as a fraction. It'll spit it out as a mixed number, and then you convert it to an improper, so it ends up being 4/3. Then 1 minus 7 is negative 6 over 6, which is negative 1. So these are your two answers, 4/3, comma, negative 1. And then the last question is done the same way. So what's my A, B, and C? A is 21, B is negative 34, C is 8. So I'm going to go x equals negative 34 plus or minus the square root of negative 34 squared minus 4 times 21 times 8 all over 2 times 21. Now, incidentally, if you just had these things, this in your calculator, you could just arrow up and replace those numbers, but it's really not too bad to retype it either. So parenthesis, negative 34, close parenthesis, squared, minus 4, open parentheses, 21, close parentheses, open parentheses, 8, close parentheses, equals. So inside my square root, which we call the radicand, I get 484. So I end up with a negative times a negative is a positive 34 plus or minus the square root of 484 all over 42. The square root of 484 is 22. So that's nice. So I get, I'm going to erase these. I get 34 plus or minus 22 all over 42. So remember, this actually represents two different answers. So I have 34 plus 22 over 42, and I have 34 minus 22 over 42. So 34 plus 22 is 56 over 42, and if you put that in your calculator as a fraction, 56 fraction 42, you'll get a mixed number, right? But you can do second ABC equals, and it converts it into an improper. I don't know if you can see that, but anyway, ends up being 4/3 for the first answer. And then here I have 34 minus 22, which is 12 fraction 42, and that gives me 2/7. So those are my two answers. One thing I wanted to say about this one, the instructions on this one say find the zeros. This one says use a quadratic formula to solve. This one says find the zeros. Because instead of, on question 30, they had already put equals 0. Here they put y equals this. So to find the zeros, you would replace the y with a 0. And then that's what enabled us to be able to use the quadratic formula. So it's, you know, it's the same thing. It's just two different ways of asking the question, but I just wanted to clarify why I was allowed to do that. Okay, so that wraps up the hard questions. In fact, it wraps up all the questions that don't require me to share the screen. So good luck to you, and I'll talk to you later.